Nevertheless, we've got a lot to get to today, and we need to get started right now with the fact that you're a liar.
I've been chomping at the bit for this one because, as with most people in the business, I'm willing to put my reputation up as being a straight shooter with just about anybody, but especially a guy who, if you Google his name and the word liar after it, which I have waiting on my Google Safari screen, we'll just go over a few of the headlines as we get into this of the first page that pops up out of about 100,000 pages.
All right,
I'm pretty comfortable comparing myself to him.
Before we get ahead of ourselves, let's talk about what's going on. We'll start with something to wrestle with. Bruce Prichard and Conrad Thompson did a Radicals Revisited episode, which was a great episode, but in that episode, they indirectly called you a liar, and I'll tell you why it's indirect. Because first time, Conrad had mentioned to Bruce that Bruce had reached out to you, that you had said that Bruce had reached out to you. Now, you've never told me that Bruce reached out to you. Did Bruce reach out to you?
He did. And I can tell you the day of the week it was. Monday, we were escorted out of the building in Columbus, Ohio. On Wednesday of that week, a day and a half later, Bruce called me. I have meticulous notes kept of this, by the way, and went back. It was about 1:20 in the afternoon when he called. And we spoke for about 10 or 15 minutes, and he said he wanted to know. He said that Vince wanted us to sign our releases from WCW. And I asked him what the offer was being tendered by WWE. He said, well, we can't do that. That would be contract tampering. My exact response, and by the way, everything I'm saying right now, you can go back and compare to my interviews at the time. And if I digress from anything that I said at that time, I'll allow Bruce Prichard to say I'm a liar. I'm pretty sure I may have a preposition or a dangling participle someplace, but factually, you'll see exactly identical to what I said at the time. And when he said that he couldn't make an offer that would be contract tampering, my response to him was, we can't even be talking because this already is contract tampering. He said he'd get back to me and never did.
Okay, so in the episode, Something to Wrestle With, the Radicals Revisited, he says that he never reached out to you, that is 100% not true. So, I guess that wasn't indirect.
There was a guy that called from his number that sounded an awful lot like Brother Love. That was, and I guess if you go back and check, and I have no idea because I don't keep track of shit like this. I'm pretty sure that if you go back and check at that time, you'll see that Bruce Prichard was pretty high up in the organization and working for the company. So again, compared to my notes from 99 or 2000, I believe.
Yep.
Compared to any interview you've heard then, between, or now, and then it seems awfully convenient that almost 20 years ago that he's finally come up with an excuse. It only took him 20 years.
All right, well, he said that.
That's a proficient liar.
Later on, they start talking about the hotel deal where, you called the hotel and asked for Dean's shoot name, and they said that he was there and that he already had signed in. Well, they said that Vince Russo said that. And then Bruce said, that's not true. Vince Russo's a liar. But Vince Russo didn't say that. You said that. So they indirectly called you a liar again when they said that Bruce Prichard came up with fake names for them at the hotel, and that there's no way that you could have called and got that because they were under fake names. They weren't under their shoot names.
Okay, well, let's go through a few things here. So you can already see that in their story, they're already lying because they're already confusing who said what. I'm the person that said that. Vince Russo called me. It was just as back curtained all of this. My ex-wife, we had gone through 8.5 years of infertility treatments without success. This is at the time when she was pregnant the first time with the baby she miscarried, the baby prior to Connor. So Dean and I were, being the closest of the four of us, we were talking quite frequently about this pregnancy and what it meant and all that was riding on it and that sort of thing. So Vince Russo called me, and again, let me back up a couple days. Cincinnati, we had the pay-per-view in Cincinnati Sunday night. Saturday or Sunday. Monday, we had the taping in Columbus that we were escorted out of the building on. We went back to the hotel at the Columbus airport, which I believe was the Holiday Inn, if I'm not mistaken. We had a couple hours before our flight, so we all went downstairs to the restaurant. We sat in the restaurant. We drank several bottles of Beaujolais wine, which is what Chris Benoit loved to drink. My exact words to them were, I know Vince doesn't want me back. My guess was he didn't want Dean or Perry. I knew that he wanted Eddie and Chris badly. And I said to them, Vince will try to divide and conquer. If we stick together, he'll have no choice but to have to deal with us. But if he divides at all, he'll split right down the middle. And I said, I know I'll get screwed. I pointed to Dean and Perry, and I said, you two will be next. I said, then Chris and Eddie, you'll be left on your own with nobody to cover your asses. We shook hands, and we made the agreement that we would share all information, that if any of us were contacted, we would share it with the others. We hugged on it, and we drank a bottle of wine on it. So Wednesday, when I get the phone call from Bruce Prichard, I immediately called Dean, because I said Dean and I were the closest of the two. Dean said that he would disseminate that information to Chris and Perry. Like I said, never heard back from Bruce after that. That weekend, I was home. I was still in my house coat. Vince called, and his exact word, and again, you can compare this to any interview I've done then, between, or now. It'll be completely consistent. He asked me where I was. I said, I'm at home in Pittsburgh. And he said, are you sure about that? And I sort of scoffed at him. I was drinking a cup of wine, or a cup of coffee. And I said, why would I lie to you, Vince? You want to talk to Carlo? He said, no, I believe you. He said, but I just had a call from, I think he said my boy at the Ramada, or I think it was the Ramada Hotel. Again, I'm speaking about my notes in front of me. So I think it was the Ramada in Stamford, Connecticut. And he said, that's where they put all the boys up when they came into town. It's where they put me up when they brought me into town. He said that he told him that his boys were checking in. His friend at the Ramada told him his boys were checking in. Well, at that time, when you said to Russo, his boys, he meant the revolution, us. He said that that he had gotten this call from this friend of his, this pal of his at the Ramada, telling him that we were checking in. I found that really hard to believe, because I really trusted Dean and all of them at that time. So I called Dean, and he picked up on the first ring. And when I asked him, Dean and I used to have this thing where we would say to each other, hey, I've got something to talk to you about. Don't interrupt me. Let me get all the way through it, and then you can respond. He started that, by the way, when he came to try to pull me into WCW from ECW. We'd gone to a sushi bar down on, right against the Schuylkill River. There's a strip in Philadelphia where there was a big sushi bar. I think it's still there. I said to him, I got something to talk to you about. Let me get through it before you respond. And I didn't tell him everything, but I said, hey, I heard you guys are in Stamford. If you're there, just give me a heads up so I can cover my ass with WCW. And he said, no, I'm at the beach house in Florida with Julie and Larissa. Julie's his wife. Larissa was his daughter. We talked for a few minutes, and he swore up and down that he would never do that to me, and asked me if I wanted to talk to Julie. And I said, no, I didn't need that. And we hung up. I called Vince Russo right back. I said, I haven't spoken to Chris, and I haven't spoken to Perry yet, but and my exact words were, I bet my life that Dean's in Florida. And he said, well, Shane, I don't want to call anybody a liar. He said, but I heard just now that they're checking in now. And he said, Vince had never talked to me like this before. So I was a bit taken back by it, but I honest to God believe Dean Malenko in my heart of hearts. He said, well, there's an easy way to find out. Call the hotel. I hung up, and again, my ex-wife, who she and I don't get along on just about anything, she could verify this story. I sat there for about an hour. I was afraid to call because, as you may remember, at the time, I had a pretty monumental temper.
Yeah.
And there was part of me that didn't want to call because, I didn't want it known that I didn't trust my friend. That was part of it. The second part of it was, if I called and found out that he'd lied to me, I was going to explode. And so I like an hour went by, maybe longer, and I didn't make the call. My wife, ex-wife, who was pregnant at the time, came in and she said, have you called yet? And I said, no. She said, why not? And I said, I told her what I just said. I said, if I call and I find out they're there, I'm going to lose my mind. And if I call and they're not there, I'm going to feel like a jackass and I didn't trust my friend. She put her hand on her belly and she said, if you call and they're not there, only you, me, and this baby know you made that call. And I thought about it. You know what? She's right. So I called. And the guy that answered was a big Mark. So whether or not they were checked in under pseudonyms, I'm pretty sure that even if you checked in under a fake name, you had to give an ID to check into the hotel. So, I mean, that's an irrelevant point. Whether Bruce did that or not, my guess it's a lie. Because whenever I asked for Perry Citullo first, he said, yes, Perry checked in. I forget. He said like sometime frame, like an hour or two ago. I said, how about Chris Benoit? I could hear him typing up on the computer. He'd asked who I was for, he said he couldn't give out that information. I said, this is Shane Douglas. He was a big Shane Douglas fan, and these are friends of mine. I'm trying to reach them. He said Perry Citullo first. Chris Benoit, he said, yes, he just checked in. And when I asked for Dean Malenko, he said, no, Malenko checked in. And so I was like, oh, thank God he didn't lie to me. And we talked for a couple of minutes on the phone. He was telling me what a big fan he was of ECW. And just before I hung up, I remembered that Dean, when he wanted to, double kayfabe, he would use his shoot name, which is Simon. I said, do you have a Simon check? Before I hang up, do you have a Simon check? And he punched it in. He said, yeah, but it's a woman. I said, is it a Shelley Simon by chance? He said, yeah, how'd you know? And my head exploded on my shoulders. I hung up and immediately tried to call Dean back, and he wouldn't answer. So, again, compare those notes to what I just said to the letter of anything I said then on interviews between and what I'm saying tonight. Complete consistency because I'm telling the truth. There's no reason to lie. And then compare that to the people that are making the accusation the other way 20 years later, trying to sell a podcast, come up with this version of a story that they've apparently never told in between. But there's multiple routes to verify this story. I'm sure Vince Russo could verify everything I just invoked his name on. I'm sure Dean Malenko would verify the parts that I invoked his name on. And I know my ex-wife would verify, because she was pretty pissed off too, and had right to be. Again, I stand my reputation up to a known liar as having been valid then, valid since, and valid now.
Well, there was more to it. They also had talked about how you were not a part of the discussion whatsoever, and that you were never a part of the discussion. Bruce said that he never even knew that you were. There was even a possibility of you even coming because you were never brought up. And he also said that all four of the Radicals specifically said that they were only a four-man group, and anyone else that contacted them from WCW was not a part of their group, which I thought was very interesting considering the situation. I always thought that they didn't want you, therefore they told them, hey, leave Shane behind. What Bruce is saying is that they never once even brought you up, and they specifically said that anybody else, Conan, Rey Mysterio, you, anybody, was not a part of their group.
Well, okay, so now here's another interesting part of this story. There's somebody else that can verify this. Terry Taylor, I made the first phone call to WWE, to Terry Taylor, from Cincinnati, right after we'd walked out of the meeting with Bill Bush. I called Terry from the parking lot of the Cincinnati building, and Terry said, let me get right back to you. And he called me back about 15, 20 minutes later and said, Vince said he'll take all of you right now. So, see, this is why I don't tell. I'm a bigger jackass probably than both Conrad and Bruce. But this is why I don't tell lies, especially in something like this where you've got multiple people cross-referenced that very many people could verify the story. I was the one that went back and told the and remember I talked about it before, I believe on this podcast, the Triple Threat podcast, where I talked about whenever I was on the phone when Mike Graham threatened Chris Benoit with a Bowie knife.
Yeah, that was on this podcast here.
Okay. And I was on the phone with Terry Taylor. That's who I was on the phone with Terry Taylor, talking to, and he was at Titan Towers. I didn't call Terry's cell phone. I called Terry Taylor at Titan Towers. Now, as you know, I can't keep dates and stuff straight. Go back and verify. I'm 1,000% positive. Terry Taylor was at WWF at the time, was the point of contact. I was the point of contact. None of them had any phone numbers to anybody in that company.
Well, now, just for your information, Conrad never really said anything about you. He never said you were a liar. He was just trying to get the information out of Bruce. Bruce was the one that confirmed that he never called you. He said that he never had you in mind whatsoever, that you were never a part of the equation, and that all that is lies. But I thought that was pretty interesting. I knew that you were definitely going to be not too happy about it, so I figured I'd bring it up to you and see what your response was. Maybe that would be go ahead.
Well, there's another person that can validate this. It's my attorney, who's now a judge in Ohio, because he was the one that was the go-between between WCW and me. When we were asked to leave, why would I have gotten a release form from WCW? The release form was, we were on a three-way call, and again, my attorney can validate all of this. We were on a three-way call. My attorney was talking to, what was her name? Diana something. She was one of the attorneys for WCW. Diana Myers, maybe? It'll pop in my head here in a minute. But anyway, he said to me, stay on the line, just stay quiet. He called her because they had faxed me at my home office a release. Told me that I had like X number of days to sign it, like a threat. As you know, with contracts are a two-way street. As long as both parties agree, not one party. If you and I sign a contract, you can't just summarily call me and say, hey, I'm breaking the contract. You can try. I can sure as hell drag you into court and win. Tort law is pretty resolute in the United States. And I knew I'd never requested a release. This had all transpired in a very tight window, days, 72 hours this all started. So my attorney was talking to this Diane, and I can't remember her last name right now. I'm pretty sure Diana Myers, but I may be wrong on that. She was talking to him, and she said, well, he's got this long to sign it, or we're going to this, that, and the other. It was throwing threats. And my attorney said, do you have any written validation that my client asked for this release? And she said, no, but we don't need that. And he said, well, I'm pretty sure you do need that. And my client's telling me that he never requested this release, which I had. Why would I walk out of a multi-million-dollar contract with no guarantee from Vince, especially after I'd already worked for Vince and gotten starved by him? What's the old saying? Fool me once, shame on me. Fool me twice, or shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. He wasn't getting me twice, and that was why I had the conversation with Bruce, and I did. Had I never worked for him before and gotten screwed by him before, I would have probably blindly signed that release form and walked up there and really gotten fucked. Which I think shows you the way they operate. No,
that was definitely a pretty interesting episode. I'm usually a listener 100% of something to wrestle with. I listen just about every week. And when I seen that come up, I was like, wonder what they're going to talk about. When I listened to the whole episode and heard that stuff, I was like, oh, Shane's going to be pissed off. So I figured I would let you know.
Here's what I'll see if I can screenshot it. Here's what I typed into my Safari search. Bruce Prichard, liar. And this is what comes up. Reliability of Bruce Prichard, ? Asked Squared Circle on Reddit. Meltzer calls Prichard a con man. Where does Bruce Prichard's hate stem from? Probably comes from kissing Vince's ass, literally. Something about Paul Heyman and Bruce Prichard. The first video that comes up is To Catch a Liar. Jerry Jarrett on Bruce Prichard calls him a liar. Bruce Prichard shoots on people calling him a con man. I mean, it really goes on and on. Anybody listening can do the same thing. Just type in Bruce Prichard liar and see the quantity of stuff that comes up. It's sort of humorous.
So what is your message to Bruce Prichard, since he had a message that you were a liar? What is your response to him if you're going to say something to him right now?
Well, I will certainly say something to him the next time I see him face to face, because he's always smiling ear to ear like brother love every time he sees, hey, franchise and all that kind of stuff. But I guess it'd be in the form of a question, like, what exactly does Vince McMahon's ass taste like? Because, you can call it a work all you want. Another man, especially your boss, tells you, pretty much orders you, you're going to go on national television, put your lips on his ass. There's probably some things that would pop up on that.
Well, luckily Bruce is not in that club, though. He's not in the Kiss My Ass club.
Really? Well, several people have told me he was. Again, I don't watch the show, but
no, I don't think I think that maybe they were referring to him just kissing his ass in general. I don't think that he's actually in the Kiss My Ass club. Now, maybe I'm wrong and maybe I missed that, but I don't think that he's in it now.
Here's a thing that I can tell you that I know that came out of Bruce Prichard's mouth, and maybe he was lying to me at the time. He came to me and told me this story about right after his wife had gotten pregnant, that Vince McMahon sat him down like a son, is the way he put it to me, and told him, you're going to be a father now, it's time to settle down, buy a house. So he went out and bought a pretty, any property in Stamford, Connecticut is going to be expensive. So he did what Vince told him, and then Vince fired him. And it was for several months, maybe 6 months, I don't know the exact frame of time, but he, some period of time, and then called him back. Now again, this is out of Bruce Prichard's mouth. Told me that when Vince called him back, the first thing he said to him is, now you know know what kind of power I really have. You know, his wife was pregnant with twins, just bought this house at Vince's urging. Now, dude, you do that to me, I'm going to rip your tonsils out to put me through that kind of stress. Put my family through that kind of stress for no reason other than to prove a point that how powerful you are. So, you know, I've always marveled at these guys that work for WWE and literally or figuratively kiss Vince's ass like that. Are you not a man? Do you not have a spine? Because, like I've always said, I don't expect anybody to kiss my ass, but goddamn, sure as fuck don't expect me to kiss yours either. If you're hiring me to do a job, we'll do that job. But don't ask me to do that and then fuck with my family in some additional way on top of that. I'd have to kneecap you for that. You know, it just, but again, you see that they keep going back. And here's the truth of the matter, as I see it, if Vince McMahon would call Bruce Prichard right now, he would break his legs to be the, if there were no flights available tonight, he'd break his legs trying to run up there tonight. You know, I'm sure he's probably had a thing or two to say about Vince since he's left. And then watch, if and when that time ever came, how fast he'd go back up there and literally or figuratively kiss Vince's ass again. It's shameful. You're not a man.